Okay, let's talk about farm to school. You know, the idea of getting fresh, local food from farms and putting it straight into school cafeterias. It sounds perfect, doesn't it? I mean, better food for our kids, more money for local farmers. What's not to love? But the real question is, how well does this recipe for success actually work in the real world? Let's dig in. I mean, just look at this. What if this was the new normal for school lunch? Imagine your kids seeing this on their trays every single day. We're talking vibrant, fresh produce coming straight from a farm right in your community. That's the dream, right? But before we can figure out if it's a dream we can actually make happen, we've got to make sure we're all on the same page about what we're even talking about. So, farm to school. At its heart, it's really a three-part mission. Part one, get that local food onto kids' plates. Part two, actually teach them about where that food comes from. And part three, which is huge, is to create a whole new, reliable market for local farmers. It sounds simple enough, but believe me, it's a surprisingly complex system.
So that brings us to the big question, right? When these programs are actually up and running, who wins? Who really benefits from all this? The promise is pretty massive, so let's break it down and look at the numbers to see who's really coming out ahead.
People who are really into this whole idea, they frame it as a triple win. And it's a really powerful concept, right? The idea that one single program can lift up three totally different groups all at the same time. But does it actually hold up? How does this idea measure up in reality? Let's look at the data group by group. All right, let's start with the kids. And for them, the health benefits seem pretty clear. Get this, studies show that students in these programs eat up to 1.3 more servings of fruits and vegetables every single day. That is a huge nutritional boost, no question about it. Okay, now for the farmers. For them, it's a direct hit to the wallet, in a good way. On average, farmers who get involved see their income jump by about 5% just from these school sales. This is a game changer because it opens up this stable institutional market that honestly, a lot of small farms just couldn't get into before. And finally, what about the community as a whole? Well, this is where the impact really multiplies. The data is pretty incredible here. For every single dollar a school spends on local food, it generates an extra $2.16 in local economic activity. That's money that stays right there in the community, supporting jobs and other local businesses. It's a classic ripple effect. Okay, so those benefits are pretty compelling, right? Hard to argue with those numbers. But that whole vision of a triple win, it hangs entirely on logistics, the nitty-gritty. How does a school actually go from saying, hey, we want local carrots, to actually serving them in the cafeteria? Well, let me tell you, the process is not nearly as simple as you might think. First thing you gotta realize is that school is a really broad term. A huge K-12 school district is a totally different beast than, say, a small local daycare. The big districts, they need massive quantities of food, and they operate on a very rigid school year calendar. But the smaller early care centers, they're more flexible. They can buy smaller amounts, and they're often open year-round, which, funnily enough, can actually be a much better fit for a local farm's growing season. But no matter the size, whether it's a huge district or a tiny daycare, buying food for a public institution means paperwork, lots of it. There's a formal procurement process. You can't just wander down to the farmer's market with a wad of cash. The school has to spell out exactly what it needs, find local farmers, get multiple price quotes to make sure it's all fair and above board, and then award a contract. It's a whole bureaucratic dance that can be really tough for a small farm to figure out. And that brings us to the reality check, because the vision is awesome and the process is, structured. But what happens when that perfect idea crashes into the messy reality of agriculture, bureaucracy, and, well, the notoriously picky eating habits of kids? Yeah, and check out this quote from a school nutritionist. It just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the central conflict here. On one hand, you have schools that need consistent, predictable stuff for their menus. The same potatoes, the same carrots week after week. But on the other hand, you've got small farms with seasonal, sometimes unpredictable harvests. So the big question is, who bends? Who adapts to whom? And when you look at the research from programs all over the world, it's kind of funny. They all point to the same few problems. Like, a school might need thousands of pounds of basic stuff like onions and potatoes, but the local farms are all excited about their kale and heirloom tomatoes. Or maybe the farmers just don't have refrigerated trucks to make the delivery. And we already mentioned the paperwork, it can be a total nightmare. And then there's the biggest irony of all, the absolute peak of the harvest season often happens when school is out for the summer. You can't make this stuff up. But this brings us to what might be the most important question of all. Let's say you do it. You jump through all the hoops, you solve all the logistical nightmares, and you get that beautiful local produce into the cafeteria. Does that automatically mean you've achieved the #1 goal, getting kids to actually eat healthier? In other words, does just having access to the good stuff mean we'll actually consume it? So, a major study, a randomized controlled trial, the gold standard, looked at this exact question. Researchers gave a bunch of low-income families subsidized access to farm-fresh produce. The results were, honestly, they were stunning. You can see it right here in the chart. The adults, the parents and caregivers, their fruit and veggie intake shot way up, a huge, significant increase. But their kids? Nothing. No significant change at all. Just giving them the food didn't mean they ate it.
So, where does all this leave us? What's the takeaway? We have a program with proven economic benefits for farmers and communities, check. We have clear health benefits for adults, check. But we've also got this major, glaring gap when it comes to the kids. So what is the big picture here?
Well, the key takeaway seems to be this. Farm to School is an incredibly effective tool for building up communities and helping adults eat better. It really does boost local economies and improve food security for families. The evidence is there. But the research also makes it crystal clear that we just can't assume those benefits are going to automatically trickle down to the kids in the lunch line. Simply putting the food on the tray, it's just not enough. And as if that wasn't a big enough mountain to climb, there's another huge hurdle: money. Shocker, right? For these really complex relationships between schools and farms to actually last, to work for the long haul, they need one thing above all else: stable, predictable funding. And unfortunately, that's often the one thing they don't have. Just take a look at this timeline of recent federal funding. It shows you just how much of a roller coaster this can be. One minute you're celebrating these huge wins, like a brand new $200 million program in 2022, and the next thing you know, a planned $660 million investment is just gone, terminated. This kind of on-again, off-again support makes it almost impossible for schools and farmers to build the kind of sustainable long-term partnerships they really need. So at the end of the day, here's what we know. We know Farm to School works wonders for local economies, for farmers, and for the grown-ups in the house. Those economic and social benefits are absolutely real. But the big, multi-million-dollar question that's still hanging out there is, how do we close that final loop? What's the missing ingredient to translate all that great access into actual action so that the kids, the very people this whole thing started for, can finally be part of that triple win too?